Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from many blogs and many podcasts around the internet, including websites like Cover 32 and Optimum Scouting. Please welcome Arif Hassan. Arif, how are you doing this Monday evening?
I'm good. I missed the Monday night game, but I think that's okay. It's Joe Flacco versus Tom Savage, so... I'll pick up the highlights later.
I'll catch the 3-minute highlight of that on SportsCenter shortly after the recording, and nothing of value will be missed.
Exactly.
I'm
sure now that we've said that, DeAndre Hopkins, set a record for, 300-yard games or whatever, but, whatever.
Well, I was watching a little bit of it, and I just kept wanting to pull my hair out watching Tom Savage play. So someone
so maybe not. Okay.
No, not quite. Someone had mentioned that this was basically something just seemed off about watching the Texans team, like the girl there's a girl out there and she's not dating you, she's dating another guy, and just that doesn't make sense at all. It's it's Tom Savage's team now. You have to respect the Texans' wishes here. It's Tom Savage's team. Just awful. Well, let's ignore that for a moment. Norse Code is ad-free. You will not hear advertisements on Norse Code. We are proud of that. If especially with the holiday season coming up, if you are feeling charitable, if you are feeling giving, and you would like to donate to Norse Code, you can do it in one of two different ways. You can go to patreon.com/Norse Code, and you can donate there. It's more of a subscription base, so you can do $1 a month, $3.50 a month, tree fitty, keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay, and keep the lights on here. If you would like to just do a one-shot thing, you can go to paypal.me/Norse Code and just donate there. We would certainly appreciate it. It helps keep the server costs taken care of, helps the recordings stay as fine sounding as they already do now, and it helps us do crazy things like when we went to London earlier this year and recorded on the fly there. So again, we really appreciate our listeners. We appreciate you guys going out and sharing the word of Norse Code. And we do have a producer to thank for this week's episode. Thank you, Carter Good, for helping us out. This was via Patreon. Again, thank you, Carter. We really do appreciate it. We do 2 episodes a week during the regular season for a reason, because you guys appreciate it, because you guys listen to it, and because you guys support us. So again, thank you so much. A quick note. We will be doing our annual Christmas episode again this year, and this is our clip show that we have a bunch of things that didn't quite make the show, rants that involve swearing that we decided to cut for various reasons, sometimes just the swearing, or things that would be otherwise questionable. So we also do put in your favorite bits of the year. So if there is something that happened this year, for example, Arif's hatred of my food takes, you can go ahead and message us on Twitter and just let us know that is something you would like to hear during the year-end clip show.
Please do so.
Yes, please do so. We got an email question that I missed this week somehow. Well, I know somehow I wasn't checking the email because it was Thanksgiving, but... We got a question about something we had said in a mailbag a few weeks ago, or probably about 2 months ago. I believe it was Dusty's mashed potato recipe. He was wanting to get that before Thanksgiving. I was like, oh, well, I'm sorry. I'm giving this to you the Monday after, so apologies. But that forced me to listen to a bunch of the mailbags, and I had not noticed how much you hate my food takes. There are some creative put-downs that you've thrown at me over the past year. So I believe one of them is, can we do a show where you don't have one terrible food take?
It's just, it's a simple request.
It's entirely possible. And looking over the mailbag, I don't know if we're going to talk about food this time. So it's just possible.
Unusual, but I suppose everyone has just kind of gotten their fill of food takes after the Thanksgiving episode. Who knows?
Nobody wants to poke the bear of the turkey is trash meat thing anymore. So,
I guess not.
I guess not.
Their
yeah.
loss.
So, again, if you have any favorite bits of the year, please just email us or send us a message on Twitter and just let me know, hey, this was something I really liked, and I will take a look at it when I'm putting it together for the end of the year. So, yeah, we had a great. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. I know I had a pretty decent one. Arif, did you survive the?
Yeah. So I didn't actually get to prepare that much food. I did, make some mashed potatoes, of course, for Friendsgiving later in the day. But my friends wanted to have a Thanksgiving the same day as Thanksgiving, which is very unusual. But I went to my girlfriend's family's Thanksgiving. Luckily they like basically, shredded the turkey beforehand. So you didn't have the normal roast turkey problem of, either it is just like, it's not that well done on the outside, but it's moist on the inside or it's too dried out, but at least it looks good, that sort of thing. They basically shredded it and figured out a way around it. So it was all right. The food was pretty good. Came home, had even better food. Really enjoyed it. Leftovers for days. Still have enough ham for a bunch of ham sandwiches. So pretty excited about all of that.
Nice. I had my second Thanksgiving cancel. So I had all I had to deal with was the brisket Thanksgiving, and that was just fine. I was quite pleased to have my apartment still smell like that when I made it back in here. I was like, oh hey, and I still have brisket left. This is sweet. And no one's heard from Dusty in days, so I just assume he OD'd on tryptophan.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Or the laptop finally got him. It's one or the other.
Fugitive.
However, hopefully the Lions game did not attempt to ruin your Thanksgiving. We've got plenty of things to talk about there, including our victory over the refs. So that was pretty cool. The first thing I want to mention, bringing up the Minnesota Vikings defeating the Detroit Lions, is please, will somebody, for the love of God, teach Case Keenum how to baseball slide? Please.
So this is actually kind of interesting. I remember way back in 2012 that people were like, why won't Christian Ponder slide? Like, he's played baseball. And it's not as if, Florida State doesn't prepare its quarterbacks for this kind of thing. Why doesn't he slide? And it wasn't like a Teddy Bridgewater thing where he was just bad at it. Because remember, Teddy Bridgewater coming out of college was just abysmal at sliding. It was like an injury risk when he slid. But yeah, I looked it up, and at that time, Bill Musgrave had, which, he's an offensive coordinator again. That's nice. If only Dusty were here. But Bill Musgrave had put together, some research and a highlight video and compared, quarterback slides to quarterbacks diving headfirst, and had found that quarterbacks diving headfirst were actually significantly less likely to be injured. Because you're much more likely to expose yourself to a hit. When you do get hit, it's more difficult to protect your head because your head gets rocked back against the turf. And when you dive head first, you very often know where your head is going. It's very unlikely that it's going to hit someone. So you're not protected by the rules when you dive head first, but you have more control over what happens to your body. So it doesn't sound like it's on purpose based off of, the way that he was answering questions in the locker room, but it may be better. So who knows?
You're not suggesting that the remnants of the Musgrave offense are still chattering in the background, going, you could just baseball slide, but you're probably not going to get injured. You're probably going to get injured if you do baseball slide. What you really need to do is just drive your shoulder into the ground every time you jump and make a run like that, and just make it look like you're going to fumble each time you do.
Yeah.
That's awful.
There are positives from the Bill Musgrave era. Play calling, not one of them.
No, no, that is not something that survived.
But after Ponder suffered a concussion after sliding, he didn't suffer that many on-field injuries. I mean, there was the compartment syndrome thing where a bunch of people called him a wimp because he almost had to amputate his arm, and whatever. That's different. But it's maybe, who knows? Maybe it's not a big deal.
Yeah. I have a feeling that his lack of baseball sliding is going to be right up there with our extra point game, and be like, one of these two things is going to rear its ugly head at the absolute worst possible time. Like,
yeah, exactly.
And not to be prophetic, because God knows that happened enough last game when we talked about the preview as to what should happen and what did end up happening. That for those who haven't had a listen yet to our Thanksgiving preview, go ahead and take a listen. Right around halfway through, we break out into the Lions preview, and at the very end of that, we give our score predictions. And I had predicted a big score, something like 30 to like 17 or something like that. And Dusty gave his prediction. I was like, well, that's what it should be. And Dusty gave his prediction saying, well, it'll be closer to this. And then it was the actual score saying, this will happen if the refs just continue to mess with us and throw terrible plays out and just continue to bail out the Lions all game. And
yeah, there was a couple more in there too. I kind of forget it, but the ref thing that showed up. We may have mentioned a specific type of play that happened. We had a listener tweet at us, hey, from the 1 hour to 1 hour and 5 minute mark, I just got chills, and I re-listened to it, and I was like, oh my God. And then I forgot most of it. I remember the ref part.
Turns out we were actually right about something. So if you want to hear us be actually right about something, please do listen to the preview of the Lions game last episode. I think it was episode 210. Go for it. It'll make you happy. So there was something that was going on with the with the bad calls from the refs, and I finally had to make a game of it. And the game was that these particular refs were just trying to make the game as unwatchable as possible and try to get you to like talk to your family. So every time a bad call was made, or every time a call was completely ignored in certain instances, like the touchdown that wasn't, or the no call pass interference in the third quarter, you gave them great praise. And when they gave a correct call, you booed them like, no, family first. We need to be talking to our family members about how much we don't like the refs in this game. And that seemed to work for a little while, actually. It made me a little less homicidal, considering how poorly the refs were going. Can we talk about the touchdown that wasn't and how that exactly happened? Because it's my understanding that after every play, the touchdown is then reviewed in New York and then said, hey, this is fine, go ahead and let them kick the extra point. So what exactly happened there?
I'm not sure. So this one was kind of confusing. There's some like debate about whether or not the Lions were actually prevented from kicking the extra point, because the ref on the field gave the all go. You can kick your extra point. And at that point, obviously the Lions should kick the extra point, and then they would have like sealed the touchdown in and whatever. But there are a lot of people saying, well, actually on the sideline, they were saying, hold on, we're getting a review call. And I kind of believe that, because as inept as the Lions are organizationally, and historically, I just feel like it is unlikely that a kicker, would just like not want to kick that extra point, especially like Matt Prater, who's like seen a couple of things. He's a pretty good kicker. He's pretty aware.
It's not like he's a rookie. This is a veteran who's dangerous.
Right. Really good. And so, yeah, I want to say that's what happened, and that's why the Lions didn't kick. But it is nice to be like, lol, Lions. That seems more likely, though. I guess. So my understanding. So this is the one where obviously it's been Thursday since we watched the game, and only rewatched a portion of it for a piece I'm writing on Trey Waynes. But I think this is the touchdown where you couldn't see because of the shoulder whether or not the ball was over the line.
Nope, this was the touchdown where the ball hit the ground and was like he bounced the ball into the ground during his roll to catch it.
Oh yeah. that one was just obnoxious.
Yeah, that is the right word for it. It was totally obnoxious. It just seems silly that this was like a thing, especially because of the events that happened like directly afterwards.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what happened. You just always feel like, I don't know, like, so in a lot of games, I don't like to complain about reffing. It feels like I'm doing that more often this season than usual. But I always, kind of restrain myself. So like the Washington game, for example, I was like, objectively, that's an ambivalent call. So I can kind of see why the refs, went against the Vikings there. And so early in the Washington game, I felt like the refs were taking 50-50 calls and slanting towards the Vikings. But that's like a thing that like happens. And so I was like, that sucks. And, maybe that's home field advantage or whatever. But it's, it's an uphill battle the Vikings have to climb against. They'll have to deal with it. In this game, it's certainly they're just making the wrong calls and just doing it like consistently, but in enough ways where they're either unchallengeable, like, calling or not calling in particular defensive pass interference, which is not challengeable, or they were like small enough that like maybe you don't want to waste a challenge there, right? So, well,
let's talk about that PI call for a second then, or the lack thereof call, which looking at it now, one of the players got hurt on that. Apparently, he got hurt not pass interfering, best as I can figure. So, when you see a call like that, obviously for Mike Zimmer, it's maddening, and he had said as much during the post game like press conference. Is there anything that happens as far as accountability with refs when they see a play that was like messed up this poorly?
Not really. So, I mean, like, yes, there's definitely accountability of a sort, but it doesn't happen, in game or anything. But, refs get grades, after the game, just like, coaches give their own players grades and stuff like that. The league reviews what the refs did during the game. They give them a grade, and those grades determine the basis of whether or not they'll be reffing in the playoffs or the Super Bowl. And, it determines, referee assignments in primetime games, I think. You don't quote me on that one. But that plays a role. And then I think it also determines, the likelihood that, because the refs don't really get demoted, but it determines the likelihood of like which members of a crew get promoted from like, side judge to field judge to umpire to ref, which I think is the sort of escalation of things. I mean, there's seven refs, so it's not as if those are the only ref positions, but I think that helps determine too. So there's some level of accountability, right? And in that case, I think it's the field judge and the sideline judge that are accountable for whether or not that DPI should have been called, and it should have been. So that might affect their overall grade, which affects the promotion and stuff.
Hand was on the flag,
and they decided not to throw it. Yeah.
But they did choose to flag Case Keenum flipping the ball at the ref / the player who sacked him.
That was so bad.
I would have understood calling the taunting penalty on the defender who was barrel rolling, literally rolling on his stomach down the field with the assistance of the other players on his team. I would have totally understood that. That would have been fine. But you called it on Case Keenum, who had just been sacked, typically. And I could be wrong here. I haven't really crunched the numbers on this, but I'm willing to bet that the number of sacked quarterbacks who've been flagged for taunting the player who sacked him is pretty low.
Yeah, it's pretty low. And I guess if they had like used another word for the penalty, people would have like maybe absorbed a little like unsportsmanlike conduct, although that is its own penalty that has a much, much bigger penalty. So, I'm glad it wasn't that. But like, if it was something along those lines, it would have been easier to absorb. Like, obviously, he's not taunting. That's ridiculous. But, the rule says you flip the ball at a player, that's taunting. Like, whether or not, like, you've got a reason to, like, whether or not it's, like, taunting, right? Because taunting is, done from a position of power, which is not what happens when you've just been sacked.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. And I think that, you have to like enforce, that kind of rule in a lot of circumstances that are maybe not taunting, right? Like if you get frustrated and you throw the ball at a player,
right.
Maybe taunting is still a bad word or whatever. But you got to call that. But that's not really what happened. Like he flipped the ball in a direction he wasn't looking. It happened to be towards a player. But, it wasn't even like out of frustration, really. It was just like, well, that play happened. I'm done.
Maybe Keenum sort of isn't used to being sacked this year, and as a result, he doesn't. It's like the Ricky Bobby thing. He doesn't know what to do with his hands. He doesn't know where to move the ball after he's been sacked because he's been sacked so few times this year.
That's probably it.
That seems incredibly likely. My family really came together in the third quarter there and did a lot of talking. we came together like a family should on Thanksgiving for the third quarter and a good chunk of the fourth. Just really coming together and talking about these wonderful refs who are trying to inspire family love over the holiday season.
God bless them, everyone.
Every single one of them. We also ran into situations where penalties were extending drives, whether or not they were the right call or not being irrelevant. Penalties were really extending drives and kept the Lions in it. Or in the instance of one case, we had 12 men on the field and they still scored on us.
Yeah, although that additional person was more a hindrance than a help. So, it may be because they had 12 men on the field.
They actually scored because Terrence Newman was still on the field.
Exactly.
They spend the whole game talking about how great Terrence Newman is, and he's a 39-year-old wonder, and then he can't run off the field fast enough to be able to get 11 guys on the field. We still have the 12th, and he just stays on because we're getting a penalty anyway. So let's try to prevent the score, and then it isn't prevented.
Yeah, no, it was real crack job by the Vikings. Yeah, so a lot of instances where you could be like, man, I can't believe the refs did that. In one instance where you're like, man, I can't believe the Vikings did that. And like historically, yeah, like I can totally believe like the Vikings, like as a historical organization did that. Oh, yeah. But like these Vikings, come on, they've been like pretty disciplined. They've had, their shit together. This season has been bad in terms of penalties relative to the past two seasons. But like, that's an absurd error. Like, what? And then, of course, like Terrence Newman got in Xavier Rhodes' way, and Marvin Jones scores, and then so Rhodes ends up giving up 111 yards in that game, which is, I think, more than half of the rest of the year combined. So, yeah, it was just brutal, and a lot of that has to do with that Marvin Jones near touchdown that occurred when Terrence Newman defensively pass interfered with Xavier Rhodes.
Oh, that was a touchdown. That was a touchdown throw during the 12-man on the field throw. That was going
touchdown, not near touchdown. Yeah, it was a touchdown, and it wasn't even a close one. God,
it wasn't pretty. There were moments where this defense just did not look in sync. But let's talk about the offense. Offensive line let 2 sacks through, so he was sacked twice. However, we did have a fair amount of running success, despite a lot of negative runs by both McKinnon and by Latavius Murray.
Yeah, after a quick, relook at some of the plays that occurred from midfield, it really does seem like a lot of it has to do with just how inconsistent the interior offensive line was. Even Joe Berger. Pat Elflein, Nick Easton, Joe Berger were pretty inconsistent, and very often we hear the word inconsistent, and we think that they've generally been bad. But really, what it means is that there were some really remarkable flashes of play, some really just awful stretches of play, and that matches Easton and Elflein for the rest of the season. We've got a question in the mailbag. I'll talk about it more later, but. Just in general, we saw some like beautiful lanes open up. We saw David Morgan was also kind of subject to this, where he had some pretty poor blocking and some pretty outstanding blocking throughout the game. So Latavius Murray, his near touchdown run early in the game that later got turned into a touchdown. Was the product of, an amazing cutback by Murray, as well as some fantastic blocking from Morgan and Berger. We saw, Elflein drive, a player down the field, but at other times they just gave up the goat right away. And that was a big problem in pass protection. There was a lot of pressure up the middle. Riley Reif played well in pass protection. Rashad Hill played well in pass protection. But the interior line gave up a lot of pressure, and Keenum's mobility, very often has bin used to extend the play and avoid a sack, and this time it wasn't, able to do that, although it was a pretty big asset in the game anyway. I think, you had a boom bust running game with a relatively low success rate, but a higher than you'd expect yards per carry, kind of as a result of that. And I think that McKinnon and Murray both played really well, despite sort of the problems in front of them on the offensive line. And I think that kind of play where on the few plays where kind of big things happen, they were able to make those things happen. And, on those other plays, they just kind of have to grind it out. I think they were fine. And McKinnon has kind of proven, kind of side note, kind of week in, week out at this point, which is just weird, that he's really good in pass protection, which is just like not a thing you'd have ever expected. You thought, coming out, he'd be a huge liability, and he was. He'd get better, and he did. That he could maybe get confused sometimes, and he did. But that he'd never really be above average. That he would just do enough to kind of polish that part of his game so he can focus on the rest of it. But he's really been good.
Yeah, he's really been good.
Yeah. So the running backs I thought did well. It's kind of the offensive line that did poorly, and it's not a remarkable Detroit interior too, which makes it, it stings a little more.
Well, there were a couple of runs specifically that they just fell apart so quickly that you just sat and wondered, like, where was the block for that exactly? One that comes to mind immediately is when, if it hadn't been a handoff, we might still be digging Case Keenum out of Ford Field. He immediately handed off to McKinnon, who didn't even take a step. He was just demolished there on the line, and you just wondered, where the hell was the block on that?
Yeah, there was a play like that for McKinnon, and then very soon after a play like that for Murray, and he was, mic'd up. So on the sideline, he was like, nearly took my soul with that one. Like, those are the words he said, and it's kind of accurate.
It looked rough. It looked like he might have taken something with him as he walked away. Not quite a chain that he had around his neck and taped to himself, but
right.
It was something anyway. But yeah, the offensive line was a little odd this week, and not against an elite pressure group, but we can forgive them a little bit as they were only able to get 2 sacks on Keenum, but it's still a little concerning, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And that kind of inconsistency popping up throughout the year, especially against a weak interior line, kind of demonstrates that even when Elflein, has pretty good games, you can't really rely on him, at least thus far this season, to reliably prevent pressure up the middle. And that maybe, Nick Easton, who's been, I think, performing a pretty, good job given sort of the position that he was put in with, they cut Alex Boone, he has to play without having a ton of experience. I mean, he did have some preseason play, but without a ton of experience with these players next to him. I think he's traded for a 6th rounder and stuff like that. Like, he's outperforming kind of his draft position in the situation he's put in. But, he's somebody that, be at risk for competition next year. And so, that's something that you have to think about. You're going to pinpoint weaknesses on this team or areas to improve. Those are those areas. And so, that's a question mark going forward, especially because, you get into the playoffs. You'll have the Rams again and Aaron Donald, who had a pretty good first half against the Vikings. You'll have Fletcher Cox, the Eagles. You'll have a lot of good interiors coming up. And some defenses that are getting better. Like, the Saints interior has gotten a lot better too. So, you might see them in the playoffs. So that's something that is something to, is concerning and something to think about going forward.
Yeah, it was just a little odd to watch considering the play we've been getting out of them lately. But let's talk about Diggs and Thielen, especially the end around to Diggs that actually worked. I have been waiting for so many years to watch an end around actually work on this offense, and we saw it on Thursday. Diggs was able to make 10 yards, make the first down, and I just sat there amazed, just gobsmacked, like, that actually happened. And Thielen is still out there and catching everything that gets thrown at him.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. I was watching a little bit of their route running in this game, and I watched them a little against the Bears. And what I find kind of fascinating is that obviously Thielen is playing really well. From a production standpoint, he's a top 5 receiver. Yards per out run, total yards, etc. But I still think that Diggs is the better receiver based off of some of the things I've seen, not just because you can get Diggs on an end around and maybe get a little bit more than you might with Thielen, but because the offense has shifted more towards creating space for Thielen, which isn't a bad thing. He's a top 10 receiver no matter what I say, right? But the difference between what he's asked to do and how that enables him versus what Diggs is asked to do, produces, I think, kind of more surprising results. Diggs has been left to kind of create space for himself with his own route running, and he's been able to do it, and he's opened out a bunch of plays where he's not targeted. Whereas Thielen, a lot of times we say, a player gets help, and that's like a bad thing. Thielen gets help because he's good. They want to run the offense at this point, it seems like, through him. And so they're scheming ways where he's the primary read, and those schemes, allow other receivers to clear out space for him, and he gets open, not necessarily because of his route running, which is also extremely good, but because, the play was designed to get him open. And so I think that Diggs is doing a better job of his assignments, but Thielen is doing a pretty incredible job. And when you've got kind of that 1-2 punch where you've got an offense where you've got a good enough play designer and someone like Pat Shurmur, a good enough player in someone like Adam Thielen to be kind of your primary target, and you've got this astounding receiver on the other side just kind of making space on his own, I think you'll always kind of get a chance to do good things. And with the space that Thielen has been given, I think Case Keenum has been doing a pretty good job over the past 3 weeks and in this game of utilizing it. A lot of people are talking about how we once again saw some of the downsides of Case, especially kind of in that second half, and totally fair. But, he's doing a better job over the past 3 weeks of, generating, good ball placement for yards after the catch for his receivers. I think in the middle of this game, we saw more of those balls that were not conducive to yak, that were placed poorly, that made it difficult for players to generate their own yards after the catch, which is a weird thing to say given that like Thielen's touchdown, that's entirely driven off of that. But generally speaking, the ball placement has been poor. I think that overall, even though in the middle of that game that kind of happened, overall he's been doing a much better job, and he's been better able to take advantage of just kind of the brilliant receivers that the Vikings have.
Would you say over the past 3 games that this was his best performance, trying to avoid just doing the dumb things, throwing interceptions or throwing up balls that are even less than 50-50?
Maybe. So, of course, the best half that he's had would have to be the first half of the Washington game. And then he also had a good, I think, second half of the Rams game. But the other halves of those games were so like, Jesus, what are you doing? That maybe you don't want to say that those games were the best. And then in this game, you don't have a half nearly as bad as the second half of that Washington game. Not nearly as bad. But you still do have a boneheaded play. And Kyle Rudolph, is it this game? It was so long ago, but Kyle Rudolph saved an interception by batting down.
That was last game, yeah.
It was last game. Okay. But, it still felt like in this game, there were balls that were just like sailing over the heads of open receivers. It just didn't happen as often, and it didn't really feel like there was as much danger. There was no point where you're like, oh, Darius Slay could have housed that. There was a moment where like a linebacker, was in position to make a pick and just didn't happen to that. They got kind of lucky. But I would say probably in terms of avoiding the kinds of mistakes that make you go, oh yeah, can't wait for Teddy. This is probably his best game, but I don't think it's a good example of sort of what he can do when he's on. That Washington game is, but this is the best game in terms of avoiding mistakes.
Yeah, the thing I had noticed right around the end of the game, I forget who had tweeted it out. It might have been Andy that had said something along the lines of, lost in all of this is the fact that Case Keenum was really low on the doing dumb stuff thing.
I saw that tweet. Yeah,
it was like, because when I think of Case Keenum doing something dumb, I think of last game when he tossed up that ball over to Adam Thielen, and Adam Thielen came down with it in defiance of God's will. Somehow came down with it and prevented an interception, got the first down and everything. You just looked at it and go, but that's not always going to be their case. You have to know that. That's not going to end up always being a thing. So, in this game, there just wasn't that much of it. So it was just nice to kind of see, I guess, a progression of things there. But there was that great Rudolph touchdown that they were calling like the big boy throw. Like Keenum knew he was going to get smacked, and he still found a way to get exactly to where Rudolph needed it.
Yeah, no, that was fantastic. Because it was like an open lane for a defender to just careen into him. It wasn't an instance where a defender was going to take him by surprise or anything like that. He just got smacked in the face and he threw the ball, right through the defender, which, is what quarterbacks are kind of like trained to do. But it's like there's a difference between, oh, yeah, that's what he's supposed to do. And yeah, that's easy to do. Like those are two completely different things. And plays like that are a really good example. Like, yeah, quarterbacks are supposed to throw through the hit. And oh, my God, can you imagine a 250-pound human barreling down at like 4 or 5 speed at you? And then you have to step into it. Like, that's ridiculous.
I'm reminded of the Jared Allen scene in Jackass all of a sudden.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think, was it Jared Allen who said that? Or maybe it was a sports science video where the defender, or maybe it was Allen, was like, it's better that you don't know what's coming because then your body is slack.
Yeah, that was it. It's actually better that you don't know. It's like being drunk at the wheel during a car accident. You're already limp. It's fine. Oddly enough, you have a higher rate of success of surviving it if you're drunk and falling asleep behind the wheel than you are otherwise, because then you try to tense up and you try to like protect yourself, trying to protect yourself from the punch to the stomach or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's exactly that. But yeah, he was able to throw through it, and yeah, it was pretty astounding. Because I mean, it's already a kind of difficult throw. Like, yeah, of course there was space for Rudolph, but like it's already a kind of difficult throw given that kind of compressed area that you're throwing through. And then yeah, he just got hit in the mouth while he was throwing. It was really great.
No, it was a great throw and a great catch and a great run. So we were able to score there, and leading us to our extra points. And maybe it's not just Kai Forbath having the issue here. What is going on special teams that is all of a sudden leading us to be able to be blocked and just mess up snaps like this?
I'm not sure. I don't think it was both block/misses, unless you want to count the third one that didn't count. That were a result of a bad hold. I think it was just one of them that were the result of I think it was a bad snap followed by a bad hold. Like it was on both the snapper and the holder. That kind of messed things up. The other one, I think it might have just been like a low trajectory or something. But timing is really important, because the way that the kicking game has kind of been designed is that you have to get that kickoff within just a certain amount of time. Otherwise, players have time to get to it, which is why a player's offsides, right, and can get to the ball. Only offsides by, I mean, not a little bit. It was pretty obvious, but offsides by less than a second. An obvious less than a second, and he gets the ball and runs in a fake touchdown. That is a good demonstration of how important that timing is. You've got a very small window in which you can do something. So if you've got both a bad hold and a bad snap, yeah, it's going to make those blocks much more likely. I don't know if I don't think that's a consistent thing, because like Kai sometimes just has great timing and he just misses it, right?
Is this just the thing that we write up as it's a Thursday game, it's a Thanksgiving game? This was the one part of our team where it was offense, defense, and special teams that didn't make the trip on a Thursday night or on a Thursday game. You're like, okay, well, if we're going to be messing up one thing, it's going to be special teams, so fine.
Right, yeah. Like I think that might play a role, and just like random stuff happens, plays a role, that kind of thing.
I will say that Case Keenum looked very annoyed that he was not getting a turkey to eat after winning the whatever you want to call that little trophy thing.
So is that just a Sunday night game or the Thursday night game thing, or like why didn't he get a turkey leg?
Well, they used to do it. Fox used to do it, and then they stopped doing it a little while ago. But I imagine he had watched the highlights of that Randy Moss game that had been floating around Twitter. And they saw the end of it when all the Vikings had the turkey legs and everything. So maybe that was it. Maybe it was something else. But I do know that Fox had given out the turkey legs at some point. And I
remember Vince Wilfork chowing down.
Yep, Vince Wilfork and a couple other people. I remember vividly a scene with Randy Moss, Dante Culpepper, I think it was Culpepper, and Chris Carter, all with turkey legs and mowing down, and all had headsets on and trying to answer questions in between, like, mouth full of turkey. So he didn't look mad. He just looked disappointed.
Like, I did all this for nothing?
I'm really hungry, guys. Like, I got a flight, and then I got to wait for food to get done. Like, what are we going to do here? But we were getting to Stafford all game. And Stafford was having one of his I'm just going to miss everyone game. What was happening with Stafford? Why were we so successful in getting to him? And boy, it just seemed like he was his throws were just off all game.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Sometimes that's like the Stafford you get. He's not like as high variance as like Cam Newton. But I think I want to say, there was a lot of pressure. I think, did Griffin have 2 sacks in this game? Made up for the last game a little bit?
Yes.
I want to say there was a lot of pressure, but there wasn't like less pressure than in other Vikings games against Matt Stafford where he's performed a lot better. Like, I mean, there was a Vikings game where Matt Stafford had to get an X-ray afterwards because he was hit like 7 times, maybe in the first half. Don't remember. And he played a lot better. That was at TCF Bank too, where I think it was colder outside. And so, yeah, it was, I don't know, like it's the combination, I think, of there's pressure, it's Matt Stafford. I think that this offense is still kind of weird, in that we mentioned this in the preview for the game, that last year was a very yak oriented offense. You threw it short a lot. It was very safe in terms of the way the quarterback threw the ball, and Golden Tate would do stuff. Anquan Bolden weirdly would do stuff. And this year it's a lot of variance, and it's not as if Stafford's unused to throwing deep passes to like Calvin Johnson and stuff. Like the previous iteration to the Lions offense did a lot of that. But you got Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones, and they're really not yak guys. I mean, Kenny Golladay probably could be, but that's not how they've used him. And Golden Tate is still kind of like your slot, throw underneath, get a bunch of yards after the catch, that kind of guy. But it's an offense that has been average in the NFL in terms of average depth of target, the number of deep throws and stuff like that. And without Calvin Johnson, you really need to take more care of your accuracy. So I think it's kind of a combination of those things where Stafford's just not as settled in this offense as he was last year. He's got to deal with, a lot of pressure, and he's kind of a somewhat high variance quarterback. So I think it's a combination of those things.
Boy, there were just a couple of throws there, and I was texting with my Detroit Lions friend and just going, well, we picked the exact wrong time to be playing our worst football of the year on some of these Stafford throws, because you just watch it and go, there is nobody near him. And Stafford is a good quarterback. For the record, I feel like Stafford is one of the better quarterbacks in the league. But boy, a game like today when a game like Thursday when you watched some of these throws, and maybe it was the lack of time behind the line, maybe it was the pressure, or maybe it was just the disruption of the receivers. But you just watched some of them, just like some of them were like Donovan McNabb style dirt burners, where it dropped right before the receiver even had a chance to do a darn thing about it.
Yeah, it was weird, especially because, before the game, I mean, we were like hyping him as like, he's been kind of underrated this year, like traditional statistics. He's kind of top third, but not top 5. Maybe he's playing kind of at that level. And then, during the game, you're like, what? Also, Thursday game. So maybe that plays a role.
Yeah, entirely possible. If the one part of their game that didn't travel to Thursday was Matt Stafford, we should be pretty darn happy about it. So
for sure.
I would take that over, fourth quarter heroics, throwing a touchdown like he did against Cleveland on a Thursday game where he ended up like popping his arm out of play, popping his shoulder out to make the touchdown throw. So like, yeah, I'll take this one as opposed to like the heroic version of Matt Stafford.
Yeah, no, acceptable compromise.
Yeah. he can stay home and eat turkey. We talked a little bit about Xavier Rhodes, but he did have the interception that was super important. What happened on that play, and how was he able to pop it up?
Yeah, that one's kind of a weird play, I think, for a lot of reasons, actually. So it actually looks weird at the very beginning before any of the kind of weird stuff that leads to the interception happens. So you look at it real quick and, it's like a double A gap look. You've got a stand-up defensive tackle. He's probably going to rush the passer, and they're probably going to be in man coverage in a cover 2 shell. with probably 4 of those guys, we don't know which ones, rushing the passer. And that all turns out to be true. But the difference, of course, is that Brian Robinson, instead of Anthony Barr, is in one of the A gaps along with Eric Hendricks. And Anthony Barr is the stand-up defensive tackle, which that's just, I think that's, kind of a lovely bit of messing with the thing that everyone kind of knows about Zimmer, which is the double A gap look with the 2 linebackers in the middle. Probably the correct response is to, throw a screen out of that and take players away from the point of attack. But teams have been so unsuccessful with that in the normal double A look that maybe that didn't occur to the Lions as a response to this kind of variation. So it was already kind of cool. Barr drops off into coverage and man coverage and takes care of his guy. But yeah, if you take a look at just what's happening between Marvin Jones and Xavier Rhodes, Rhodes is playing, he's in man coverage, but he's playing, don't let the guy get behind you, despite the fact that he has safety help. He's playing as if, he's a zone cornerback, but he's got his eyes plastered to Marvin Jones. So when Jones makes his cut, he makes it kind of slow, and that allows Rhodes to just cut in, and there's not a ton of space for Jones, and so he has to slow up as he gets to the sideline, and that lets Rhodes just watch for the ball. He's got his hand right in between Marvin Jones's 2 hands, pops it up, reaches for the ball, and corrals it back. It was really stunning. It's not as good as the, I guess, Seahawks fans, I think, call it the tip in the NFC Championship game. Richard Sherman tips the ball, I think, to Earl Thomas against Michael Crabtree against the San Francisco 49ers. It's not as good as that. That's just brilliant. But it was pretty close. It was really good. And then there's a convoy with Andrew Sandejo and gets tackled by Eric Ebron, who I've always maintained should have been a defensive end. That was fun. It was pretty crucial. It stalled the Lions at a moment where it felt like, the Vikings were on the verge of giving it up right before they actually did feel like they were giving it up. And yeah, I don't know. It kind of cements the whole thing about, how, Xavier Rhodes has been kind of disrespected by, Pro Football Focus, and he does these kinds of things. And, he had a weird game given, the Marvin Jones touchdown and stuff. So it was nice to see.
Yeah, it was an odd game to be sure. And it's just one of those things where apparently he's just going to catch game-ending interceptions or close to game-ending interceptions, because we had 3 more run plays after that, and then we attempted to kick.
Yeah, so that's the weird things. The first half we were praising Pat Shurmur. We were talking about how he's the actual MVP of the season. We on Norse Code a couple of weeks ago we said that he was the Vikings MVP. He's done such brilliant things with the Vikings offense, and it really feels like he tried to take that away. I mean, because outside of one particularly amazing drive, the Vikings weren't running the ball really well, and like I had said earlier, they had a low success rate. And so even if they had some explosive runs that kind of counterbalanced that, the moment when you're leading, you really want to do the things that give you the best opportunity to drain the clock and advance the ball slowly, which for a lot of teams is running. But when you don't have a high success rate when you're running, it's not that. And so 3 runs in a row that were stalled in the punt, it's just annoying. And so it really felt, actually, I mentioned Musgrave earlier. I was going to mention him here. I'd already thought about this. And I remember when Musgrave, was coordinating the first half of the season, Percy Harvin might have been an MVP. Second half of the season, Adrian Peterson was the MVP, that 2012 season. And he'd been doing this brilliant job of play design. He was creating these fantastic plays, scheming, Percy Harvin open, finding ways to generate additional space, help Christian Ponder identify coverage and do the easiest possible thing at the moment. And then he would just call these terrible games where he would either get too cute. He does a great job of self-scouting and creating these plays that work off of that self-scouting. Several games later, he plays this great macro meta game, and he plays this awful calling game. In the middle of it, he would call runs at the wrong time, and he'd call passes at the wrong time, and he would call the wrong pass play, and you'd be like, well, I mean, that's a brilliant play, but what are you doing with it there? That sort of thing. And it really felt like that's what Shurmur was doing, where he orchestrated these beautiful plays. He's kind of doing the same thing with Keenum, helping him identify the coverage, telling him which side of the field to look at, which Keenum doesn't always pick the right side of the field, but it's been working out, so it doesn't matter. that sort of thing. And then he's like, yeah, just run the ball 3 times. Don't care if you get 2 yards. It's like, the game is still kind of close. Maybe you should try to win it. That was very frustrating.
Well, in a certain sense, it got the clock to continue to move and everything, but it was still a little disconcerting, I think.
Yeah.
And then the jump. And the player, who's, I'm not even going to bother looking up his name and trying to remember it right now, just because the idiotic thing he said after the game, where he claimed that the refs screwed him out of this touchdown. They robbed him of this moment of everything. It was like, I may have seen this on Twitter, so this may not be an original thought, but I am convinced that he jumped there on purpose, because it's entirely possible the refs just weren't going to call that.
Oh, right. Yeah. That's actually pretty fair. That's probably not what happened, but reasonable.
I want to believe. How about that?
Yeah. Not a difficult thing to believe considering the circumstances. So, yeah. I actually didn't know that the player had complained that touchdown was taken away from him.
Oh, yeah.
That's
he just
dumb.
Up and down, left and right, was just like, yeah, the refs, the refs really took it away from Detroit today. I was like, I didn't jump off. I'm like, really? You were like 2 steps past the line when that thing was snapped. But okay.
I mean, believe what you want to believe. It's not hurting anybody, except I guess you.
Yeah, there are people on this planet who believe that the Earth is flat, and people are allowed to mock them every day. So, I mean, we're allowed to mock you for your view on this, but.
Yeah, I mean, the rules screwed him. That's true.
Yeah, let's be honest. The real problem here is the NFL and their rules about that. If that weren't the case, then yeah, Detroit might have actually won that. Darn shame. It's
so annoying to think that, like, oh yeah, the refs were against you. They weren't helping you out the whole game.
No, God, no.
But I mean, like, in fair, who does have that? Like, very few players would have that kind of self-awareness. Like, no, the refs weren't helping us. I mean, we just did the right things at the right moment. You got to be, you got to make the game.
Did you see Diggs and his comments after the game about the refs? That was amazing.
Oh, no. What did he say?
Oh, Diggs was just going, no, the refs called the game exactly how they needed to call it. He was just like, what's we're looking for? Like in the NBA.
Like sort of the cynical, like, yeah, that game became real close, huh?
Yeah.
Like that kind of thing?
Yeah. In the NBA, an owner is not allowed to point out big like mistakes by the refs or like complain about the officiating, blah blah blah, or they're like fined in large numbers. And Mark Cuban goes out of his way to do it because it promotes like the refs being poor, we need to fix this, and B, he just has more money than God, so he just goes off and does this. But other owners that are not as flashy will say stuff like, well, the officiating was the officiating, you gotta take what you can get, and it's just the officiating, so you do that. And that's basically what Diggs did there. He's just like,
yeah, right. It was very like, well, what he said is technically like, that's not a violation of the NFL rules. No. But we all know what he meant.
Apparently, sarcasm is totally fine. Yeah. No, that was great. I did appreciate Diggs doing that. So we are going to move on to the mailbag now, and because we have so many questions about the same topic, I'm just going to read a whole mess of questions right now and just kind of lump them in together here and call it good, and we can get through this fairly quickly because they all kind of have the same answer. So Brian Bjorgen asks, I love the Teddy versus Case talk. I find it very interesting that we as fans seem so eager to dismiss Case's success in favor of Teddy's upside. Do you think this is because we've been so conditioned for failure and let down so we can't trust success? I find it almost as interesting that many Case supporters talk as if they weren't the same fans thinking that he should be cut in favor of Heineke this preseason. Let's touch that real quick.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't think actually the reason is because we're like conditioned for failure. I don't think that's it. I think it's because we kind of have a general understanding of who Case should be based off of like the last 4 years of play. The fact that literally only one team was interested in him last year was the Vikings. Just what we saw in the preseason and the offseason, that, he wasn't really any different as a quarterback. What we saw kind of early in the season, some of the bad games that we saw, like there's a lot of evidence telling us that this is not who he is as a quarterback. And so it's very easy for us to be like, well, yeah, he's not good. And so it's very difficult for us to be like, yeah, over the past 3 games, he's improved substantially. It's super difficult because it's difficult to absorb, how much a player can change, because players don't often change this much, especially, I don't want to say this late, but relatively late in their career. So there's a lot of reason to believe that it's not the case. I don't think it's because Vikings fans are preconditioned to believing failure. Patriots fans were preconditioned to believing in failure before, Tom Brady took over for Drew Bledsoe, which is another question in the mailbag we'll get to. Yeah. And, they got over it. But they didn't get over it the year that Brady won the Super Bowl. It took a while. And I'm not saying that, Case Keenum is like Tom Brady and Sam Bradford's Drew Bledsoe. That's actually not terrible if Case turns out to be really good. Yeah. But, I'm not saying that. But, it takes a long time because, we're responding to patterns of behavior. It makes sense to respond. We saw Josh McCown's 2013, Nick Foles' 2013. We saw, Josh Freeman's 2010. We've seen, I guess it's Colin Kaepernick's 2012. We've seen instances where, or RG3's 2012. We've seen instances where one season of really great football doesn't sustain itself outside of the Vikings organization. Then, of course, within the Vikings organization, that, we're like, yeah, I don't know about this. We've got a lot of evidence that this guy's not a good quarterback. We've got some evidence that he might be a good quarterback, but we've also got additional evidence that evidence is not good evidence, that sort of thing, right? So, yeah, totally fair to question it. I don't think it's weird, but I do think you need to take into account the fact that in the prior 3 games, he's had some pretty good moments.
Yeah, which leads us to our next question. Which is from Kyle Slabby, who asks, I can't tell if the rise of Case and my general unease about him as the starting quarterback going forward is unfounded or somewhat mirrors Arif's take on Carson Wentz.
Ouch. I don't know.
Is this just an argument for confirmation bias?
Yeah, that's funny. I don't like... Did you hate Case that much beforehand, or do you really hate the Houston Cougars? Is that it? I don't know. I've accepted that Carson Wentz is playing kind of brilliantly this year. I think that there's some soft evidence that's probably not good enough to overcome this level of play, that, Carson Wentz's success is not sustainable, but it's not good enough evidence for me to continue to tout it. I think that, until or if he collapses in year 3, there's no reason for me to continue saying that Carson Wentz is a bad quarterback. Because I don't think it is like Nick Foles' 2013. I think that's a different scenario than Case's current season and Nick Foles' 2013. But yeah, I think that, I don't know, I don't think it's the same thing, man. I started with hate, and it's very easy when you start with hate. Plus, honestly, he didn't have that great of a rookie season. It wasn't as bad as like Jared Goff's or, a lot of rookie seasons, not like Jamarcus Russell or Ryan Leaf. I think it wasn't that bad. But it was.
Well, you're just throwing out like the biggest bus in quarterback, like NFL draft quarterback history. And he's just like, well, he wasn't as bad as these guys.
I'm just trying to think of quarterbacks that played early. Like I think Derek Carr and Mike Glennon's rookie seasons were both probably worse. Carr ended up turning in a pretty good season the following year.
Ponder played ridiculously early.
Ponder's rookie season wasn't as bad as his 2012. That's the weird thing. So I don't want to use his as an example. But yeah, Joey Harrington, his rookie season was pretty bad. Donovan McNabb's rookie season was awful. I think Carson Wentz's rookie season was better than all of those, but it's still, I think, below average as rookie seasons go. So I thought, it's fair to criticize the things that he did in that season. But, he's played pretty brilliantly since then.
Side note, does Ben Natan still look too much like Carson Wentz?
Yes. There's too many Carson Wentz doppelgangers, which also does show up, I think, in the mailbag, but the Eagles Twitter account definitely noticed.
Yeah, I did see the picture they tweeted today. So let's go to Matt Beckendorf, who asks, is this how 2001 Drew Bledsoe fans felt? Does playing Keenum all year hurt our chances of signing Teddy long term?
I don't think, I think it hurts the Vikings' chances of signing Teddy, but I don't think it hurts Teddy's willingness to sign with the Vikings, if that makes sense. I guess I don't know what's in his head or anything like that. And there's, I guess, some evidence that, like, you know, for all the good qualities that he has, and he has obviously a ton of them, like he's just a good person. You know, he has like switched teams in the past. I think he had recently committed to the University of Miami. And then when Bobby Petrino took over at Louisville, was Bobby Petrino? You know, he switched because I think you know, a recruiter had left, or, you know, something like that. Or the University of, it was maybe Bobby Petrino took over Louisville, but the University of Miami like switched you know, the direction that they were coaching or something like that. And so he switched teams. So it's not as if like unwavering loyalty to a commitment that he made is like something that is like present in his historical career as a quarterback. But, you know, I like to think that, and maybe this is just wishful thinking, I like to think that the Vikings are probably his first priority. Plus, you know, he knows that maybe the Vikings believe a lot more in him than a lot of teams do, and hitting free agency is not something that would help him. So from the perspective of signing Teddy, I think Teddy wants to sign with the Vikings, regardless of whether or not they stick with Case, because it's a totally reasonable, you know, position to take, to continue playing Case. But, you know, as to whether or not, you know, the Vikings decide, hey, you know what, Case Keenum's our long-term starter, like that is a different question. You know, if they continue playing him and he takes them to a Super Bowl, then you've got a really tough question on your hands.
Hayden asks, is there a point where you just have to roll with Keenum for the rest of the season?
Yeah, I think there's a point. I think that once you get to like week 16 and you're still playing Case Keenum, keep playing him. I guess in week 17, if like it doesn't affect the seedings at all, then yeah, you could play Teddy. Like, you know, the Eagles lose 3 games, which I would not cheer for at all.
Not in the least.
Yeah, right. There's competitive reasons. Having the first seat, that's great.
3 to 4 picks each game. No, that would be terrible.
Right. You know, Josh Freeman was in 2011. He was on a Pro Bowl trajectory until the final 4 games where he threw like 12 picks. Just saying.
I just want the dramatic squirrel music to play right now. Dun dun dun.
He was playing legitimately great for most of that season. Anyway. You know, so say the Eagles drop, you know, 2 and the Vikings, you know, kind of run the table. And I think it's impossible in that scenario for the Vikings not to have the first seed, or any scenario where it doesn't change the seedings at all. There's a couple. Then, yeah, I guess in week 17 you play Teddy and maybe you make a decision. I don't know. But for the most part, you get to week 16. That's it. But I don't think that the point of no return is exceedingly soon. Like, I don't think it's the Atlanta game. Like, I think that you have a little bit of time, just not a ton.
No.
So, yeah.
And it shrinks every week. So it's just Case Keenum is continuing to play and continuing to play well. So there's really not much more we can do about it.
Yeah.
Also, are the Beatles overrated?
I mean, yeah, but they're good.
I don't necessarily think it's an overrated issue. And speaking as a recording engineer, most of the advances that were made in the 50s and 60s, as far as recording was concerned, was as a result of this arms race that happened between the Beatles and the Beach Boys. And so all of this, like, at least from the back end of things, as far as recording and overtracking, overdubbing, and all of these like crazy moves, including the move to stereo as opposed to just accepting mono as the only like type of speakers, like a lot of this was driven by the Beatles and like the hours and hours and hours they would just spend in the studio just working. So it's hard for me to consider them to be overrated when they're so important to the history of recording and like moving it forward in lurches, moving it from like 4-track tape to like 32 tracks in the span of just a couple of years. So it's hard for me to view that as overrated, but they're good. It's just I don't know if they're the best or anything, but they are certainly important.
Right? Yeah, in terms of cultural significance and apparently industry significance,
much.
You know, it's kind of unrivaled, right? And like they've impacted music making. I'm not a music history buff or anything like that, but like the way that they developed hooks, like sort of the odd way that they generated beats, which I guess was because Ringo Starr was not a good drummer. I don't know. That's a rumor. I can't confirm that.
I do like the line that he's not the best drummer in the Beatles. I have always enjoyed that joke.
Right. But yeah, evidently, he's like a poor enough drummer that he wasn't doing what the manager wanted him to do. And that made the beats weirdly more addicting because of a weird trick in human cognitive science. This is all like hearsay. Like I haven't actually looked this up.
So as it turns out, I'm actually an expert on a topic that Arif isn't. Okay, cool. I'm totally fine
that
with
makes
this.
sense. I mean, care about music. I mean, I'm
putting out 2 records at the moment, so I mean that's I have
that fits.
Yeah, it works.
But yeah, like they impacted the way music was written and designed. Yeah. They've obviously impacted music marketing a ton. You mentioned that they impact recording. So in terms of cultural significance, like obviously outsized, like probably more than Elvis, right? But in terms of like, are they a good band? Yeah. Are they as good as a bunch of people say they are? I don't know. A bunch of people have been shitting on the Beatles recently, so maybe not. Maybe they are. Who knows?
Well, the same people who do that are the same people that like to bring up that John Lennon beat his wife at like every chance they can possibly get just to get the reaction from somebody who hadn't heard that. So like, it's that sort of person that just like continues to dig on it. Like, yeah, well, I didn't really appreciate the Beatles until I was actually in recording school when we spent like weeks at a time going, let's take a look at this and really break this down. And it felt like the first semester of college for the student who like takes some like philosophy course and then goes back to his friends over Christmas break and goes, dude, I know everything now. Like it felt a bit like that after going through the first couple weeks.
Have you guys heard of the Beatles? Holy shit!
I had to do, side note, I had to do a paper on the David Bowie song 5 Years. And this paper had to be, I believe, 10 pages long. And it had to be about everything involving this song, the instrumentation, the rise of the falls, kind of production and like history of stuff. And like by the end of it, it was like every time I hear the song, I just want to tell the next person who's like sitting next to me, if you listen to this really carefully, what he's really trying to say, it just you try not to be that person. you try so hard not to be that person. Next question is from the real HG, who asks, do you see any sort of quote unquote nightmare scenario where Keenum starts the rest of the year and the Vikings feel forced to sign him long term, i.e. Teddy walks?
It's like the Flacco scenario, isn't it? Except the difference, of course, is that Flacco was only good in the playoffs. And so they signed him based off of essentially a 4-game sample and the knowledge that he has a rocket laser arm. Except it wasn't a laser; it was just a rocket.
It was an elite rocket laser arm. Right.
Sorry, Peyton. I took the title from you from a weird commercial that you did a decade ago and gave it to Joe Flacco. But yeah, I don't. Yes, I guess it's a quote unquote nightmare scenario. I would be cheering for Teddy, but my guess is that he would have to compete to start or something like that. That he wouldn't get as great of an opportunity to start as maybe he deserves. Plus, it's a difficult market, like because Tyrod Taylor's going to be hitting that market after the Bills continuously screwed him. Kirk Cousins evidently is hitting the market. Keenum evidently might get a huge contract from Washington. They're a team that's interested, according to Pro Football Talk. Who knows? Maybe Alex Smith hits the market. Maybe they trade or cut him, and they go with Patrick Mahomes, especially after kind of what's been happening the past 5 games. Something, right? There's a bunch of quarterbacks that are potentially hitting the market. AJ McCarron's hitting the market, who's kind of at the low end of maybe competing with those guys for deals. So yeah.
Well, we even have a question from Luke Braun, who asks, who is Case Keenum going to Mike Glennon this offseason? The Vikings, Jags, Skins, Jets. You could argue the Saints might be in there if Drew Brees decides to retire, or if you want to look at a very realistic possibility, is Denver, whose quarterbacks are just like a graveyard of awful.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's who knows, right? Because I mean, the Vikings are obviously looking for a quarterback because nobody's under contract. and Denver, obviously. So yeah, it's interesting, and there's a bunch of pressures moving him towards kind of that Mike Glennon contract. There's a bunch of pressures moving him away from that Mike Glennon contract because, again, there's a bunch of quarterbacks hitting the market. And there's potentially 3 or 4 first-round picks that are quarterbacks that no one's confident in, but will probably go in the first round. So you've got to deal with that. That's going to depress his market. I don't know. If I were to pick, it would be the team that's been rumored, which is Washington. That's the only team I know of that there's a rumor. So that's and they have a history of doing stupid shit. So
yeah, especially in the situation of Kirk Cousins, who I believe was asked today, or was told today that management is looking at, they need a little bit more time to kind of consider whether or not to be signing Kirk Cousins long term. And Kirk goes, I don't know. I like to think I've played here a lot over the past 3 seasons.
That's good. I mean, sometimes, like, in your face Kirk Cousins annoys me, especially the "you like that" meme is just really annoying. But that's hilarious. That's really good.
It's like I don't know, guys. I think I've been here a long time. I think I've been passing for about 4,000 yards the last 2 seasons. But okay, sure. Next question, Adam West. Oh, here's your food thing. Adam West asks, we had ham and turkey on Thursday, and for the first time ever, I thought the ham was clearly better. Am I now a horrible person?
No, you're just enlightened. It's fine. Bad ham tastes bad turkey tastes worse, good ham tastes great, good turkey tastes all right. And you just happen to be at the confluence of maybe average ham and good turkey, and you just found an average ham, and that tastes better. Who knows? That's fine. I did have someone tweet, I think in response to that, or in response to me tweeting at Andy, who tweeted a picture of a turkey at me. Arif, the issue isn't which meat is better, it's the gravy. And this is John at 44 Foreman, who tweets in some really interesting questions a lot of times. He's really good. In terms of like the kinds of thought-provoking questions he asks. He's a high school football coach. He knows a lot. But he's like, Arif, it's the gravy. The ham you can't make a good gravy out of, which isn't true, but I'll admit that ham gravy is not as good as turkey gravy, fine. But the turkey gravy, makes the turkey, and it, makes kind of the rest of the dish, and you can't really have that with ham. And, glaze just isn't the same thing. Also true, fair. So that why won't you accept that? And it's like, well, if you're gonna make a gravy, why don't you roast a chicken and get a better gravy? Because chicken gravy tastes better, beef gravy tastes better, veal gravy tastes better. It's ridiculous. You could just roast a chicken for Thanksgiving, and a lot of people think that's ridiculous, but just taste the difference. Come on, guys.
just a little faith. That's all you're asking for. And while we're on the topic of Thanksgiving, Josh Swedlin asks, when it comes to Vikings football, this Vikings football team this year, what are you most thankful for?
Pat Shurmur?
I'm going with injury luck. Because we've had a bunch of people go down, but not out. Like every other game, one of our corners goes down, but isn't out. With the obvious exception of Dalvin Cook, who we hope gets better for next season. It's been a situation where we've been lucky on the injury front, with the exception of people that you seem to curse, which we could also bring up Justin Poolman asking, could Arif Hassan please remove the hex he placed on Mike Remmers now?
I don't know how I did it. It was just like a throwaway comment. Like, maybe he gets injured. That would suck. Next. Like, that's what and then he got injured.
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
He sure did. Kyle Slabby asks, I'm guessing the defensive struggles from some of our stars is due in part to the short week. But what about Detroit's passing attack worked so well against us? Are other teams equipped to use similar tactics?
I don't think that there was anything that Detroit particularly did. I mean, Detroit's been better against the Vikings than, if you take a team with Detroit's passing overall ability and see how they do against a team like the Vikings. Detroit has always overperformed. But they've been doing it in different ways. Like sometimes it's like, yeah, Calvin Johnson's just better than Josh Robinson. Big shock. Or Golden Tate is just really good at generating yards after the catch, and he had the ability to shake Xavier Rhodes out of his boots, last year and 2 years ago, I think. those things happen, but that's not the offense they ran, on Thursday, right? That's not the offense they ran, earlier in the season, I think week 4. It's just been different stuff. And so I don't think it's anything like endemic to the scheme or the design of the way Detroit creates their passing attack. I think it's just, the divisional opponents know each other pretty well. The Packers play better defense against the Vikings than they do for most of the year, which is always frustrating, but happens to be a thing. It's just like a thing. I don't think that there's anything schematic or unique to the way the Detroit designs their passing game.
Christopher Wiley asks, this year's team is so uniquely deep, I have no idea how to feel about mock drafts for the Vikings. Any thoughts on positions we might consider targeting?
So I think at this point, for the past every year, it seems like mock drafts for the Vikings were really, when they put them out, especially sort of in December and November and maybe even January, although that's a little bit less true as kind of boards clear up. It's been about finding who are the top 3 players at a position of need, say offensive tackle, and we draft those to the Vikings. Or a mock drafter will kind of misread what the Vikings kind of needs are, and they'll draft a player that the Vikings do have taken care of, and then you yell at them because the Vikings don't need a player at that position. That's been just a way to preview kind of the players at the positions that drafters feel like teams need, and this year that's not useful because there's very few times where the Vikings will need to pick a player because they play a particular position. And I've been a huge advocate of ignoring people who say best player available, because it's not a heuristic that any team uses, even into the 5th and 6th rounds. Although I think once you get to the 5th round, you should. Teams don't do that. Teams will definitely draft for need outside of the quarterback position, and especially for the quarterback position. And if you need a defensive tackle and there are no good ones left, yeah, they'll either trade down or draft another position of need. That's a thing that happens. No one drafts the best player available without acknowledging that they need a player at that position. How angry, would you be if the Vikings drafted a running back in the 1st round? They'll be dumb as hell, even if that player was like the best player available. Like, yeah, we didn't expect, Nick Chubb to fall this far, or, whoever's a good running back this year, Saquon Barkley to fall this far, which that would be a surprise. But he's the best player available, so we drafted him. Like, that's not what's going to happen. And so, that's, a thing that like people kind of say, you should just draft the best player available, and that stock will. But this year it really feels like maybe they have the luxury to do that. There are 2 positions that I feel like the Vikings definitely need to focus on. 3 technique tackle. I'm a huge fan of Julio Johnson, but he's a 4th round pick. I think that he has the ability to play as a really good defender, especially against the run, even though he was better as a pass rusher in college. But I think that the team could use competition there. The team thought that as well. I mean, they brought in a couple of free agents, Will Sutton, Dayton Jones, etc. So yeah, 3 technique tackle, an offensive guard. Joe Burge is going to retire soon. I haven't been, delighted with the play of Nick Easton, and I've got my reservations about Danny Isidora, who is not starting now, so is not a long-term solution, at least from the perspective of things that we know. And so those are the 2 positions I would target. But after that, like, this wide receiver is the best one available? Yeah, why not? Like, I would be okay with that, right? A linebacker would be fine so long as it's not like a 1st-round linebacker and you're in a weird spot. A cornerback would be fine so long as it's not in the first 2 rounds, so you can get some competition for either Trey Waynes or Mackenzie Alexander. That'd be great. A safety would be fine, even though Anderson Day is playing at a really high level and Anthony Harris is potentially better. That's fine. And the Vikings can do that. They're going to draft in the 3rd or 4th round a pass rusher. That's just what they do. And that's probably going to be fine too. I like Tayshaun Bauer a lot, but competition isn't bad there either. The Vikings have a lot of freedom, and they can really, kind of move around and pick players that, especially after the 1st round, that really kind of fit, the team philosophy and fit kind of, who the best talent may be without having to worry too much about, pigeonholing themselves in terms of value for a position. So yeah, just whoever the best player available is, which mock drafts in November and December are not designed to do. They're designed to project positions and preview positions that people think are important for teams. And that's just not a good plan for the Vikings right now, or not a good way to draft for the Vikings right now, because there's not very many positions of need, it seems like.
Right. Next question is from Bill Botke, who writes in with an interesting idea. The LA Rams purposefully got to the line with 25 seconds left on the play clock so that Coach McVay could relay a play to quarterback Goff prior to the 15-second communication cutoff. From there, Goff audibles the play to the team. This clever strategy appeared to have failed in Minnesota. Why? Did it fail because US Bank Stadium was too loud for Goff to effectively communicate audibles to his team? Did it fail because Eric Kendricks can change the defense, i.e. effectively making him the defensive quarterback? And how would the Vikings counter this strategy if they end up playing the LA Rams on the road? Could the Vikings use this strategy, or do they use this strategy?
To some extent, a lot of teams use the strategy. The Vikings do, but it's not actually that great of a strategy because of the second thing that you mentioned, Bill, which was that defenses kind of can adjust to what they see, or they can before the play is called, show one look, and then after the dummy call or the real call at the line of scrimmage, change the look. And actually, Harrison Smith did this a couple of times in the game, where he would change the coverage or talk to the team after Goff had relayed whatever it was he was going to relay, whether or not it was fake or real. So yeah, noise plays a role, and I think that there was definitely at least one play in the game where noise did play a pretty significant role, where I think one of the players didn't hear the play. But for the most part, and that may have caused a timeout. I think that we saw an instance of that too. But for the most part, I think the response has just generally been for the Vikings to show one look at one point and then change the look, which is how you counter that strategy. If it happens, on the road, kind of same thing, because the Vikings have such versatile safeties, and because both linebackers are very athletic and have been playing well in coverage, especially Anthony Barr this year. You can do a lot of things with the defense that disguise and look at as one thing and be credible in that look, and then actually just do something else. And, Everson Griffin, Brian Robinson have been dropping off in the coverage, which I see people complain about on Twitter all the time, with Everson Griffin or in other teams with like Von Miller. It's like, chill out. It's part of a larger plan. It's fine. Like, Von Miller's not going to rush the passer every play, but the goal isn't to get Von Miller or Everson Griffin sacks. The goal is to get pressure on the quarterback and create the best outcome, which that'll happen sometimes. So yeah. And part of that credibility is making it look like maybe Everson Griffin's going to drop into coverage on this play and he doesn't, so they'll change things. It happens a lot. I think the Vikings do it a little bit more than a lot of the teams. And I think it's because of the defensive versatility that they have.
So Nathan asks a couple of important questions here. Is Pat Elflein good? Pro Football Focus has him rated in the high 20s, yet had him as a player of the week for week 10. Is a high variance center sustainable for long-term success?
Oh, I made a spreadsheet for this question. 1 second. And of course I did.
Of course I made a spreadsheet for this. We're going to be able to point to this on the show notes and be like, so this is the exact moment at which Arif cared too much about this mailbag question.
Well, I was doing something else, and it turns out I saw this mailbag question, and I just had to move a couple of things, and it turns out to actually work for this. So if you take a look at PFF game-by-game grades, which is unfortunately only something you can get with the PFF Elite package as opposed to their Edge package, which costs a lot of money. Thank you, zonecoverage.com, for covering that. You can actually see the variance between game-to-game grades. So no surprise, the two most consistent players for the Vikings who consistently get really high game scores are Harrison Smith 1, Linval Joseph 2. Not a huge shock. Harrison Smith has had very few poor plays this season, much less poor games. There's I think there's a consistent poor player like Laquan Treadwell. It's really consistent at not getting a high grade. Fine. But the two most inconsistent players, according to PFF, are Nick Easton and Pat Elflein. And they both have largely poor grades as well. And so each of them have had 2 games where they've graded above 80. And the rest of the season, they've graded below 50 in some fashion. And the reason for that, despite some of the positive things we've seen from Elflein, is because he makes a lot of little mistakes. And if you just look at this Lions game against, again, a really poor front, you can see a lot of instances where Elflein is either giving up pressure or giving up a block, or Latavius Murray has to jump cut out of a tackle essentially given up by Elflein. And you see like 3 of those plays, over the course of like one drive. And then the very next drive, the first play, Elflein is like escorting a player to the end zone. Like it's just a thing. Like he's very inconsistent from play to play. He also happens to be really inconsistent from game to game. And he was, I guess maybe PFF's best center in week 10, and he had a great game. In fact, you could tell during the game that, he was doing a really excellent job. And so I wasn't surprised to see he ended up with like a really high grade. But yeah, at the moment, he's kind of a liability. That doesn't mean that you can't build on that. One of the most cerebral positions in the NFL is center. It's like quarterback, center, and then like maybe linebacker. It really depends on like your opinions of linebacker. Like Justice Mosqueda thinks linebackers are trained pigs. This is a thing that he thinks, which is like weird because like the whole thing about edge. I just want to rant a little bit. The whole thing about edge rushers is that, or force players or math rushers or whatever he wants to call it, his formula that predicts, edge rusher success off of athletic measurables is that you don't have to do a lot of thinking, and that technique plays a significantly smaller role. And so athleticism can tell you a lot more about a player's play at the edge position than it can at another position. That doesn't make any friggin' sense that he like thinks linebackers just don't have to be that intelligent to play. It's just ridiculous. Anyway, that aside,
I suppose we could move on to the next question.
No. I just want to say this. So he plays a position that it's very difficult to learn and absorb. Not everybody is like Travis Frederick. It takes a while for some players. Like John Sullivan wasn't good until like I think 2010, and he had a really bad prior year. And I think maybe it was 2011. And he had a really bad prior year, and everyone was like, maybe we should replace him. And then you heard an offseason story. Well, he was playing injured, but it's like, who doesn't say that? Matt Khalil was always playing injured, and he's going to be good this year, and he never was. And then he actually played really well. And I think a lot of it is just it takes a lot of time to play and absorb the game and play at a high level. And I think that's what's true with Elflein. I think the upside is definitely there. His positives are very positive, but he's just making a ton of mistakes. So right now he's a bit of a liability, but not one I'm super concerned with long term.
So the reason why I said we could go to the next question is because we have an F, marry, kill question of Justice Mosqueda, Packers fan Chad from your other show, and Ponders 2013 season.
Well, I have absorbed and dealt with the 2013 season.
That is one way to put that.
Yeah. Chad is a really smart guy. So he calls in to the other podcast I do, the Andy Luckery Football Machine at Zone Coverage. He's actually a pretty smart guy. He's a Packers fan. That sucks. But he's a pretty smart guy. Pretty clever. Knows what he's talking about. Phenomenal singing voice. I'll marry him. Just to have the singing voice, and you gotta have someone that you can respect, and I respect Chad. I'll fuck Ponders 2013 season because you just close your eyes and deal with it, and I'll kill Justice.
See, I was thinking that that Justice is effed here simply because you don't marry him. No self-respecting person should, and then. Of either sex, really, and you just kill off the season, the 2013 season, and just call it good. Like no, you don't bring Justice home to mama, but you can't live with yourself after what happens with the 2013 season.
But I've already dealt with it. I've already lived through the 2013 season. But
you're going to be revisiting it here.
That's okay. I've absorbed all the lessons. It's going to suck, but like I've grown and matured. It's okay.
Justice just needs to die here.
Yeah, that's also a goal.
I don't want to necessarily be responsible for it, but if it happens...
I mean, I was forced into it. I had to kill one of them. Yeah. And despite the fact that one of them is not a tangible object that has life or sentience or rights, I had to pick Justice. It happens.
I'm sure his feeling will not be hurt. Not feelings. Feeling. He's allowed to have one. Final question. How much of the website IHateCarsonWentz.com does Arif own?
I've had this question come at me multiple times, either through mailbags or direct tweets or in email. I was not aware of this website until I received a barrage of questions. I still actually haven't clicked on the link yet.
Let's take this opportunity while you are on the podcast. Go ahead and open up IHateCarsonWentz.com. It's a series of memes, but go ahead and just pop this open real quick.
Okay,
I just want this to come back.
I like the devil horns.
Yeah, I just want this to come back as like you entered in the wrong address because you just like out of anger, like Carson Wentz with like an S instead of a Z.
This is really more of an anti-Eagles website.
It really is.
These are some pretty funny memes, but they all kind of hit hard because they're all about how the Eagles don't have rings. I clearly don't own this website. I wouldn't make jokes about the Eagles not having rings. That'd just be a tremendous self-own.
Yeah. Be like, oh, well, the Vikings don't either. Waka, waka, waka. And you go, sad face. No.
That garbage truck one is great. Holy crap.
So, to answer your question, Arif does not own any part of IHateCarsonWentz.com and is just more upset that someone stole his idea.
Yeah. They executed this really well. None of this has to do with Carson Wentz.
Not particularly, no.
There's got to be like a fake picture of him getting stuck in a bathroom, like like some real good Carson Wentz stuff, like when his celebration was a friggin' handshake. Like some really good anti-Carson, or literally anything from his high school days when he's got a bunch of videos on YouTube and he looks like this awkward pimp. Like nothing. It's just Eagles stuff.
Nope. I was thinking
terrible website design.
I was thinking that what you should do is just have a website like arifasan.com where you, because somebody had asked before, you guys talk about the articles that Arif writes, and they're not really aggregated in any like one place. So what you should do is just have like a one place. I was like, okay, well, what if you just had arifasan.com and you just put stuff on? Maybe if you offer to buy IHateCarsonWentz.com and then just put all your articles there. That people would know it. People would know. Okay, that's Arif's website. That's IHateCarsonWentz.com.
It's totally normal. There's no references to Carson Wentz on
never.
the website.
No, never.
It's just that's a phenomenal idea.
I just want Ben Natan to have to pull that up one day. When you post a link on Twitter, it used to do like a shortening thing before the 280 thing, so you couldn't tell like necessarily the website it was going to. Just say, I posted my new article. You should probably read it, and just like DM him the link, and he clicks on it. As IHateCarsonWentz.com is now in his favorite like links.
That'd be great.
So maybe that's what we do with the December money for Patreon. We kind of put it down and try to buy the domain of IHateCarsonWentz.com and try to turn that into a link aggregator for you.
That's great.
This is good. I like this idea. This idea's got wings. All right, so that is going to be it for this episode. A little bit later in the week, Dusty will return to the show, presumably alive. Otherwise, that'll be a very fun episode. And you guys will be discussing the Falcons game in all of its glory, all of its splendor, and what we should be expecting from the Sunday matchup. That should be a really good game. I'm kind of intrigued, especially with the defensive player that just went into concussion protocol as well. That's something. So that is going to be it for this episode. Arif, what are you writing about?
Trey Waynes, and how, like with Carson Wentz, I might be wrong on him. Although not really. He's not worth a first-round pick. But still, he's improved.
There's a lot of hedging going on right there.
Well, it's just like we just talked about how I was wrong on Carson Wentz. Now I'm going to write an article on Trey Waynes. And, everyone knows I didn't like that pick coming out. And so I might as well just be like, well, he's playing well now. So another thing I'm wrong about. Because, again, not my original take, but good for a stand-in on how I'm always wrong.
I'm just imagining this being the episode of Scrubs where Carla is all of a sudden people just feel comfortable with telling her about all of her faults, and she comes home and just goes, I just got ripped on for 20 minutes by all of my friends. I don't want to hear crap. I don't want to hear a damn thing. Not at all. Well, that is going to be it for the show. Again, if you enjoyed the show, if you'd like to donate to the show to keep us ad-free, to keep the lights on, you can go to patreon.com/Norse Code, or you can go to paypal.me/Norse Code and donate there. Again, we appreciate anything you guys are willing to throw at us. We just like to keep the lights on and keep this going for you. So if you enjoy the show, please feel free to donate. It's the holiday season. Toss us a buck in the tip jar. We do appreciate it. Otherwise, please share the show with your friends, family, coworkers, NASA employees. Do what you got to do. We appreciate it. So, for Arif, for Dusty, my name is James. Thank you so much for listening. And demand excellence. Demand Norse Code. And we'll see you later this week.
Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, or wherever else fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, who can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. Our intrepid producer and occasional co-host James Pogachnik can be found on Twitter at Big Mono, or curating the official Norse Code Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. I'm your host with a firm grasp of the obvious, Dusty O'Connell, and my name is my handle on Twitter. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, your one-time donation can be made at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Please visit our website, norsecodepodcast.com, where you'll find links to our Facebook and YouTube pages, along with the episode archive and some other good stuff. And any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be emailed
to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. And on behalf of the entire Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.